I've made a couple videos now going over the N64 offerings on Nintendo Switch Online. The N64 was added a little over a year ago and followed the Nintendo and Super Nintendo libraries, which were added to the service in 2018, 2019 respectively. Now, the N64 app still has several games, announced and unannounced, that need to be added to the service, but I thought it'd be fun to look ahead to what could be following it down the line. Now, the most likely path forward for Nintendo Switch Online is to add Game Boy and Game Boy Color, and then I imagine maybe Game Boy Advance and, fingers crossed, GameCube. GameCube being the least likely option in my opinion. Now, adding these consoles probably makes the most sense, but it's also very predictable and safe. This got me thinking, what could Nintendo add to the service that would be, I'm assuming, not super difficult or taxing on the Switch or Nintendo themselves, but also offer unique, new, exciting options to get Switch owners to open their wallets like Nintendo loves oh so much. I want to talk about why I think Nintendo needs to add a Satellaview app to the Nintendo Switch Online. I'm going to give it a little bit of background on what the Satellaview is, go over why I think it makes sense for Nintendo Switch Online, and then, last but not least, go over some of the games I would like to play on the service. So what is the Satellaview? I'm only going to go over the basics here for the sake of this conversation, but if you're interested in a more detailed history of the Satellaview, there are plenty of videos who covered that better than I ever could. Alright, so in December of 1994, Nintendo, alongside Japanese satellite radio company Sento Giga, I think that's how you pronounce it, sorry if not, partnered to create a service and add-on to the Super Famicom that could essentially beam limited-time games to people's homes. Basically, there were windows of time where if you had the service, you could download whatever game was on the menu, so to speak, to the Satellaview's internal memory to play. The physical attachment was essentially an additional bottom half of the Super Famicom, and it retailed for 14,000 yen, or about $150 in 1994. Now I know what you're thinking, yes, Nintendo, the company who is regularly criticized for their online infrastructure, was using a satellite in the 90s to shoot games to people. Sounds crazy, right? These games are only available for a small window of time, sometimes coming back for another run later on, but it was unfortunate because there were some unique, never again released first-party games in the service. Also, the games were sent from a geosynchronized satellite over Japan and have never actually been available in the West. Really looking back on it, it was a super cool idea and maybe even a little ahead of its time, leading to, in my opinion, some wasted potential. Sadly, the Satellaview ultimately met its end in June of 2000 and Sento Giga declared bankruptcy about a year later.
I declare bankruptcy!
However, if you're interested, I am confident you could find these games somewhere online if you put in the effort, but why make us go through that? I already paid Nintendo to play games I either have or have played before with the convenience of my Switch, so yeah, being able to play games from my favorite franchises that have never been available to me before, best believe I'm on the hook for that. I really think there's a cool opportunity here to spice up the offerings on the service. I did want to quickly touch on why I think doing this could actually make sense for Nintendo. One of the most common complaints I see from people with Nintendo's legacy offerings is that they're just selling the same old games to us in different ways over and over again. And yeah, they are, and I'm a part of the problem. But I do think Nintendo is going to have trouble keeping up this trend forever now that things are shifting more and more digital. For example, when the next Switch comes out, I think it's almost a requirement that our game libraries travel with us, similar to how PS4 to PS5 and Xbox One to Xbox Series works. Hell, Steam is another great example. I think Nintendo would have a hard time convincing its consumers that they are going to continue to rebuy its games in perpetuity. I think that's a big reason why they decided to go the subscription route with the NSO. This way, people get their games, Nintendo gets their money, and as long as Nintendo has more games to put on the service, people will keep subscribing. Now eventually, Nintendo is going to run out of games to throw on NSO. Then what? Panic? No. That's when they need to get creative and give more unique offerings to keep the customer base happy. Now, do I think the Satellaview games are going to realistically knock people's socks off when they finally get a chance to play them? No, probably not, but I bet a lot of people are at least curious enough to want to try them. There is value to be had here with these games, even if a lot of them are shorter or even just simple remakes. I know Nintendo probably understands this as well, I just really hope they can convince themselves this is worth their time. Now for the fun part. What games could we even get to play if the service came to Nintendo Switch Online? Over 100 games came to the service from several popular developers, not just Nintendo. Konami, Square, Capcom, and more all had a hand in the library. a pretty wide range of franchises could be enjoyed here as well. You had your Marios, your Zeldas, Fire Emblem, F-Zero was there, a cool Mario Excitebike exclusive, so much neat stuff. Now, a lot of this stuff was smaller scope, sure, maybe even being borderline demos like in the case of the Super Famicom Wars offering, but come on, why not just throw me a bone and let me try them out? If you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description to the full list of games I found on good old Wikipedia. So let's get to some of the highlights for me. One of my favorite Nintendo franchises, and one of its most important, is The Legend of Zelda. The original Zelda is a game I appreciate and have played through a couple times now, but I've always thought it would be really neat to get a remake of the game. Well, the Satellaview kinda had that. A 16-bit, completely remade version of the game was floating around in space, and guess who never got to play it? Me. This game looks fantastic, and honestly, one of my biggest complaints with the NES original is the rigid, clunky movement, so I would love the chance to get to play the Super Famicom remake of it. There was also another Zelda game on the service, this one being a unique title, The Legend of Zelda: Ancient Stone Tablets. This was an interesting game because while it had its own unique dungeons and story, the game had a time limit of 60 minutes over which the game can be played. I don't know exactly how it worked, but to me it kinda sounds like an early practice run of Majora's Mask. Over the course of these 60 minutes, different events would occur at different times, and it was high score based. How cool would it be to have a leaderboard system built into NSO and have people compete for high scores on a Zelda game that probably 6 people in existence have had the chance to play? Now, I do love Zelda, but a Nintendo franchise I love even more is Fire Emblem. Go ahead and check out my video on why I'm excited for Fire Emblem Engage. So I was both surprised and excited to see there's a Fire Emblem game I never even knew existed on the Satellaview. BS Fire Emblem Arcanian Chronicles was released in 4 parts and were basically one-off maps set before the events of the first Fire Emblem game. I would love to get the chance to try these 4 maps out one day, even if they aren't really a part of a connected narrative. Funny enough, these 4 maps were later included in a mainline Fire Emblem release, but that release was Fire Emblem 12, and that game is sadly Japan only. Crazy to think with the popularity of the series now, just a little over a decade ago we had a region-exclusive Fire Emblem game. There are a lot of games I could go over, but the last one I really want to highlight is actually one you can go play right now if you want to. Earlier this year, Square Enix released a remaster of Chrono Cross to all platforms, including the Switch. And that's all fine and dandy, that was a PS1 game, but the cool thing is in this version of the game, the Radical Dreamers Edition, came with a previously Satellaview only release, the text-based visual novel of the same name, Radical Dreamers. Now this is a visual novel, not so much a game so to speak, but I thought it was cool of Square to think to include this little piece of history with a modern release. So do I actually think there's even a real shot of Nintendo adding Satellaview games to Switch Online? Sadly, no, at least not anytime in the near future. No matter how cool I think it would be, and even though SNES games are more than playable on the Switch, I seriously doubt Nintendo is considering adding Satellaview games anytime soon. It's just not something that would appeal to the masses in the way the Game Boy or Game Boy Advance would be able to. But never say never. The Satellaview has at least been referenced not too long ago in a huge first-party Nintendo game, Super Mario Odyssey, so I know at least some people are thinking about it. One of the costumes Mario can unlock is the Satellaview costume, and it was honestly one of my favorites in the game. It's a spacesuit that looks just like the one they had in the marketing for the original Satellaview back in the 90s. Looking at the description, you can see the game poking fun at Satellaview as what the future used to look like, and as a forgotten service, but maybe, if we're lucky, it won't be forgotten for much longer.